Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida. Dude, I'm telling you, dude. Dr. Narco Longo came on and dropped the hammer of the god.
America's mother, daughter of Atlantis. God sent the weatherland, the devil sent the Spanish. Florida is Eden, the fountain of youth, Kali is deception. So Florida is the truth.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Dr. Narco Longo.
Florida, it is everything. There's too much truth bombs being dropped. I can't digest it all.
Old World, Florida.
Please welcome Dr. Narco Longo.
That's how we do it, guys. I hope everyone's having a good night. Live from Lake Worth right now. It's Tuesday, 8:38, and I'm joined by two good friends of the channel. And we'll start with one, then let him introduce himself, then we'll introduce the other. But my first guest, okay, I'm going to be seeing here pretty soon in Texas, because I'm taking a little bit of a road trip. He's got an event that I'm going to let him talk about. And it's going to be a lot of fun. You guys are going to get to be tuned into it too and see some of the cool stops that I'm making. Going to try and make a little bit of a old world Texas style video out of it. But Robert Phoenix, man, world's greatest living astrologer practicing. But thanks for joining us.
That's a little steep, man. That's a little rich for my blood, but thanks. Yeah, so we have a gathering that we do every October. This is our 5th, and it's called the Harvest Moon Gathering because it's around the Harvest Moon. And just so happens that the date that we had booked for the event this year, because we have to book in advance, just happens to fall in the eclipse.
Yeah.
So we are going to be right at ground zero for the eclipse.
Yep. Kerrville.
Kerrville.
Kerrville,
Texas. So yeah, that in and of itself is going to be a very interesting phenomenon. Not only the eclipse, but the amount of people that are going to be. It's like fucking eclipse mania here. And you know, the sort of the coalescence and the broiling of that energy, because this area is pretty small, but you bring in they're like guessing there could be 1 million people here.
Wow.
It's like really huge.
Wow.
So, and it's a pretty wide area, right? I mean, we're talking, you know, it's Texas, it's big, so you can spread them out. But yeah, so we have that, and then we have speakers, of which you're going to be one. I'm going to be doing presentation, and then my good friend Shauna Home, who's tremendous. She's an author, and she's done a lot of work with mushrooms and the ancestors. She's just freaking brilliant and has a ton of integrity. So she's going to be there. She's going to speak, and we have some other people. My friend Darlena, who is an absolute witch with human design. She's going to be looking at the eclipse through human design gates. So there's a lot happening. My friend Mark S., who's an artist, who's been on my Friday Forecast show. He does these really very cool, like I call them spiritual caricatures of people. He calls them cruelty-free cartoons. He's going to be there, and he's going to basically get into people. Right? He tunes in. Mark tunes in and asks, people questions about themselves. He does these really incredible, like caricatures. So we have a lot going on the whole weekend, and the hotel is sold out of rooms. I still have some spaces at the event if you want to jump on robertphoenix.com. You can find out more about it there, but you're going to have to find a place to stay because we're all booked up at the Inn of the Hills. So there you go. That's what we're doing.
robertphoenix.com. Here, let me swap over to your website. So if you guys want to attend, you want to see Robert, you want to see me, you want to come see the eclipse, robertphoenix.com. And I'll be in Texas. Florida's.
If you scroll up, it's right on the front page.
Cool.
You'll see the little illustration for the
Okay.
eclipse. The eclipse with the bunch of grapes inside of it. There it is, right there.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I'm gonna be there. You'll be there. Very cool gathering. Now,
if you're gonna step out on a limb and go to the event, you should probably let me know in the next 2 to 3 days, because part of the package is you get fed. You get 3 meals plus a brunch, plus snacks, good snacks, not shitty snacks, all day. So, with the exception of breakfast, which a lot of people will either skip because they're doing some kind of a fasting or they want to do it on their own. Everything is taken care of. Beverages, well, the beverages we drink, which are non-alcoholic. But there's a bar there, so if you feel like you want to have an eclipse cocktail, go for it.
right. So that's why I've put this together. We've got Texas. I'm going to be heading over there. We've got the eclipse going on. And like you mentioned, we have the path of this eclipse this year going right through just about the center of Texas, just about maybe a little west. But for the next year coming up, 2024, if I'm not mistaken, we have another path also cutting through Texas, intersecting very, very close to where we're going to be at. Isn't that true?
They're almost on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And one starts from Oregon, which is where the last eclipse started, right? It was on the 33rd state of the Union, and we talked about this last time. And I bet Mario knows this, that eclipse, when the eclipse path ended, it ended at the 33rd degree, right on the coast of Florida. So it started on the 33rd state and ended at the 33rd degree. So it starts again on the 33rd state, and then it comes right down and hangs a right, cuts right through Texas. And then the one in April, to me is huge. Like we get a little taste of it on the 13th. The energies are a bit different because the eclipse is in Libra. The one in April, people are inviting me to these eclipse parties in April. I'm like, no thanks. I'm not going.
You're gonna be in the bunker.
Well, it's heavy. It's coming up from Mexico, right?
Oof.
It is coming up from
Guys,
the south.
Those Mexican eclipses.
Right, you've seen Apocalypto, right?
Yeah.
So, no, man, it's pretty heavy, and when you factor in everything that's happened with the border and all the so-called migrants, and you get this heavy-duty, intense scenarios, and the vibes aren't great. And then it goes north, it kind of dogtails with the New Madrid fault line, and then heads east, and I think it exits at the upper part of the country. So essentially, when you put all three eclipses together, they create an aleph. The two eclipses, the one from 2017 and the one in 2024, are the X. That's the X, right? When you throw this one in, which comes down here and comes here, it creates an aleph, which I believe is the first letter in the Hebrew language, and it also represents an ox.
Wow.
Right?
That's amazing. I have that written down in my notes to bring up tonight.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump your train, but
that's incredible. I have it right here. Aleph X Ox. Let's talk about it.
Wow. You're wonderful. So guys, go check out the event. If you want to see Robert, you want to see me. Under the X, in the, what do they call it? The path of totality. Is that what they call it?
That's what they call it. Yes.
You will be right in the path of totality if you want to come hang out in Texas. But I'd like to introduce our other special guest tonight. Florida's the Texas bit of this stew. He's the Texas ingredient. Now, in terms of the X, the symbolism of the X, there's a lot kind of bubbling out of Texas that goes beyond just this arrangement of these two eclipses. You have the T and the X of Texas, so T to X. You have people like Elon Musk, Twitter X, SpaceX, T to X. We're going to get into that. We'll crack that whole can open. But when I was kind of thinking about this, Mario was the guy that I knew we had to have on to talk about the symbolism, not only of the X, the etymology of Texas and technology, Texas, some of those companies that are moving to Texas recently. So yeah, you guys know who he is. His live streams they do tremendously well on this channel. People love seeing what he's got. And like I said, like I always say, I always learn a ton when I have him on. So Mario, and we're very blessed to have Mario and Robert here together meeting for the first time tonight. And so yeah, what a blessing. Mario, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for the invite. When I heard Robert was going to be on, I was really stoked. I mentioned it earlier before we went live, but I've been following his work off and on for a number of years now. And I know he's a brilliant mind. And I know, obviously, the whole world's best astrologer thing. You may not want to claim that label. I have a friend who got a reading from you. She said the same thing. And so this was years ago, too. And she was just singing your praises, man. So just to be able to chat with you is awesome. And I was actually in the path of totality during the 2017 eclipse in Oregon. So I was in Salem, Oregon, right on the outskirts of Salem, Oregon. And the amount of people that were there was completely nuts. Farmland, that essentially had bumper-to-bumper traffic for hours and hours. I had never seen anything like this before. So absolutely, people will be descending on Texas. It's a huge, huge amount of energy moving towards that path of totality there. That's awesome that you guys are going to be able to check it out for yourselves.
Dude, I was fucking stoked when Robert, not only when Robert invited me, but when he said that it was coinciding with the eclipse. Like, wow. It's going to be pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So
I hope I get to... sorry.
I was going to ask Mario, what was the energy like with all those people there?
It was fascinating. Everyone was in complete awe. And have you guys seen an eclipse before by chance?
Yes.
Full totality? Yeah?
Not full totality, but...
Not full.
It was amazing. There was this huge buildup, right? And it was just a lot of people with their families and dogs and lawn chairs and everything else. And people were just overwhelmed. I felt like almost people didn't know how to react or something like that because it's such a new experience. And so it was kind of electric, honestly. It was really something to see and behold. It almost felt like hyper... I don't even know what to say, hyper HD or 3D or something like that. It felt like it was like a movie graphic. And I'll just say that it was surreal, exactly. Surreal, sublime, but it really was a very eventful sort of thing for me to experience on a few different levels. So in some ways, I almost feel like I haven't been the same since. And then I got it too. You hear about the symbolism of the eclipse and people having different sort of ominous things attached to them. And when I saw it, I'm like, oh yeah, I now I understand why this is such a big deal. Seeing it in photography, you know, it captures the essence to a certain degree, but seeing it for yourself is a complete mind blower.
Wow. You know, talking about that, Mario, you mentioned not being the same since. Robert, last time I think I had you on, or maybe we were backstage, but we were talking about Trump's infamous stare down with the sun on, was that 2017?
That was the 2017
Eclipse.
It was almost as if he was like tempting the gods.
Right.
You know? He's tempting the gods. He has no glasses on. And
It's like,
and you know, he's a Leo rising. He's got Mars in Leo on his ascendant. He's got Trump Tower. His penthouse is like a shrine to Apollo. Like he was fully into this moment. And then you have this. I always thought that this image down here with Barron and Trump was really fascinating, right? Like the son is in the shadow of the father, you know. So you have this whole other kind of eclipse element here with these two, and then, you know, after this eclipse, it's like this might be Trump's peak in his presidency, because after this, I mean, things were hot before this eclipse, but you know, his entire reign as president, but particularly post eclipse, was like eclipsing his identity, right? Eclipsing his ascendant, eclipsing his Mars, all those things that he was always good at and able to count on. You know, I'll punch first, I'll punch harder. That didn't work. Didn't work as much. So I think the eclipse really did play a role in the Trump presidency, and in that regard, for America, because it cut the country right in two. Right. And here's the guy that some people would blame for cutting the country in two, for being so polarized. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but a lot of people would make that case. And he's a Gemini, so of course there's partitioning going on. But it's a really interesting and kind of poignant moment in some ways, especially with Barron just in the shade of the son in the shade of the father. What do you think, Mario? What is your take on all this?
Oh my goodness. I just have to say, I've really only discussed this maybe once or twice online. And it was something that I really had to deal with on a number of levels. But I tempted God in 2017, looking at the eclipse without glasses on. And I actually burned my macula. And so I have a void in my right eye where I cannot see anything. It's a blur. And I'm a graphic designer. So I've been a graphic designer for 2 decades now. I have a refined eye when it comes to design, just because that's what I do day in, day out. And so I left the eclipse sort of happenings, and I was driving home, and I noticed that my eyes were still kind of like adjusting to the light or something along those lines, and I didn't quite understand. It took me like a day to realize, holy shit, dude, you burned your eye looking at the eclipse. So it is absolutely no joke. The brightness that comes through, but right before totality and just after totality, it is way brighter than, at least that's my understanding. It seems to be way brighter, you know, than just, it's like a laser or something like that, than, you know, just the sun when it's just being normal out there and it's not being eclipsed or what have you. And so that was a big thing for me. It was kind of, I call it my chironic moment, actually. And so this is my wounded healer sort of moment. So I really had to do a lot of transmutation. I had to do a lot of inner work. And it was a huge sort of deal for me to finally even be able to talk about it like this, right? But I haven't been the same since, because all I have to do is just look anywhere and I'm reminded of the eclipse because I have that void in my eye. So if I close my left eye and I'm just looking at you, Robert, right now you're just a swirly little blur, you know, in my eye. It's almost like this pulsating, swirly little blur. And so that was a heavy thing that I had to deal with. And but like I said, in a way, I feel like it was kind of a blessing, you know, and I almost have to look at it that way. But I feel as though that's why I haven't been the same since. So I have a very personal story with that eclipse, and I think now eclipses in general because of what happened to me.
Dude, you're the guy to have on for this one. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah,
when I invited
I
you
hardly
on.
ever talk about it. Yeah,
Wow, dude, that's crazy, man.
definitely.
That was the
So,
2017 one, recent one you said.
2017 Leo season, right? And I was excited too because I was part of a small group locally where we were trying to understand the alternative ways of looking at eclipses, right? Rahu and Ketu, the head and tail of the dragon. And so we were really excited looking at the esoteric stuff, just trying to understand what it all represented astrologically and things of that sort. And so I felt like there was just such a big swelling up of interest, and a lot of us just really wanted to wrap our head around this. So by the time it happened, I just felt like I was kind of like caught in this moment, and I did not even realize that I was looking too long. I thought I would be fine, and I just, it got the best of me for sure. Luckily, though, I'm not blind, and so I can still do my thing as a graphic designer and as a symbologist and everything else. But it really gave me a new appreciation for my vision and eyesight. To be honest, one of the ways I do look at it was that my eyesight was damaged, but it gave me vision, kind of symbolically or spiritually. Yeah.
Were you looking to like find something in the void? Was that your goal or intent?
I felt as though I just wanted to connect with the energy that was being presented to everyone. And I felt as though I was maybe perhaps going to have a moment that was going to be transformative. So I was building it up to be a transformative event for me. And then it ended up being that, but not in the way I had expected.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, that I mean, that in and of itself is kind of an eclipsed outcome, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you're something's happening, and you're not that you're expecting something, but the thing that happens is sort of the reverse image or the reverse outcome of what you might have expected, which is kind of like a negative sun or a black hole sun. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. No, depending on the light, if I close my eyes, I can see a void. I could see. I can see it. It's with me every single day. So I feel like this eclipse hasn't left me. I've thought about it every single day since 2017.
Wow. And here we have another one coming up, and it's got to bring something up for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking so. And I honestly, this isn't something that I was looking into until Longo invited me on, and since then I've been looking into it, and the amount of synchronicities symbolically are off the charts with this one. So thanks for prompting this, because I'm getting a lot out of just diving into what all is happening here.
What struck me about that eclipse with Trump? I think it happened at 28 degrees Leo, right? It was on the 21st of August. That's the second to last degree of Leo. And you get in those outer degrees, especially 28, where the energy seems to be all over the place. And then 29, there's nothing left. But it just seemed to me like that eclipse, and especially with Trump being a Leo rising, Mars on his ascendant, it was kind of like the end of Kings in some ways. That's what it felt like to me. It was like the end, like Trump being this kind of modern American version of royalty. Even if he theoretically brought himself up by his own bootstraps, right? Like and since then we've sort of tumbled down into this world of it certainly doesn't have any chivalry or any codes or anything that might be even remotely connected to that kind of model in a positive way, right? Like we've just tumbled down into sort of the backside of this with this kind of Aquarian sort of madness in a lot of ways. Don't you get that sense that post this eclipse, like the whole Aquarian energy and the crazy and the mob really got kicked up?
You're muted, buddy.
Hey, how's that?
You're good.
Good.
Okay. Well, let me know if I need to switch it. Sorry. Well, here, moving forward, let's get into some of the symbolism. My bad if you guys couldn't hear what I was saying. Mario, how long did you look at it when you heard Shirai?
You know, I've thought about that, and I've tried to wrap my head around how long it was. Obviously, long enough. Hard to say, man. Honestly, I would almost have to like sit and with a timer or something and imagine or whatever. But I mean, less than like 20 seconds or something. You know. And I was being really reckless because I noticed that it was, obviously uncomfortable for a second. And I just kind of like plowed through it unknowingly. Obviously I had no idea I was doing actual damage. And so I was like, oh, well, this isn't too bad. I'm like, if it were really, really bad, I would definitely turn away. But it wasn't that bad. And so, it is what it is. And so I really... I encourage people to take this very, very seriously if they're going to do any of this, because I think that some other people probably would have gotten burned way worse, perhaps not as much, but it did enough damage to me that it was, definitely something I struggled with for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have brown eyes? Do you have brown eyes? I couldn't see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So your eyes are going to be more receptive to the light too, right? That's the other part of it. Due to the pigmentation, you're going to take more in.
Yep. And it's changed since then too. My sensitivity going indoors and outdoors, it takes me a second to adjust. That's something that I've noticed, is that my vision has changed, honestly. So my night vision isn't so great anymore compared to what it used to be. And then also having my eyes closed and there's a lot of light out, when I actually open my eyes, I'm colorblind for probably 10 seconds, 20 seconds, something like that. And then very slowly the color starts coming back and I can start differentiating between different hues and whatever. But it's essentially kind of like a color blindness for a little bit. So there's been a lot of little adjustments that I've had to make because of everything.
Is there any visible change to your eye?
No, I don't think anyone would notice anything. So nothing that I can see. I feel as though sometimes in photos that my right eye, it almost feels a little sort of, what is it called? Lazy.
Wanders a little bit.
I don't know if it wanders, but yeah, maybe actually, if that's what it is, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like it might be a little lazy compared to what it used to be. And then I've read some of the mythologies, right, of one of the gods having his eye removed or losing an eye or something along those lines. And I'm like, holy shit! I'm like, dude, this is amazing. I mean, so a lot of those storylines have kind of resonated and clicked with me since everything happened.
True. Thank you for sharing that, man. That's a good little caveat for all this.
Yeah.
Is you've got your own, been touched by the Eclipse himself, touched by the dragons, you could say.
That's it. Yep.
So let's get into some of this symbolism and some of the etymology and why the T and the X. So Texas, the word Texas, the name Texas, TX abbreviated, like I said. Anyone who's been paying attention to the world the last 5 years or so will notice that a lot of companies, businesses, corporations, people, freedom, comedians, freedom fighters, you name it, are flocking to places like Texas and Florida. We talk about Florida all day long, but we're going to talk about Texas tonight, and how Texas is drawing people for other reasons. I guess you could say the corporations tend to be flocking to Texas a lot more than Florida. And why that is, to me, looking at the name Texas, seems like a better fit for the technology of this country, for the tech to move over to Texas. And I was joking with Robert when we were on the phone. Silicon Valley turned out to just be a silly con. And, a couple decades in, it's running dry, and it seems like the floodgates are opening up in Texas. And tech, TX, that's not all we're going off of. Well, let's look at one of the most famous people making this exodus to Texas, right? Would be Elon Musk. You've got Joe Rogan too, and a bunch of losers. Not that I'm not saying I love these people or whatever, but Elon Musk is making that trip over to Texas with at least one of his large companies. They're setting up shop in Texas. It seems like their primary place. And you've got Tesla with the T. Okay? Tesla with the T. What else is he known for, Elon? Space X. So you have your Space X, the X on the tail of that. Well, those could just be two random associations. But then what did he get? Twitter, which was a T, and now it's an X, right? So he took the T from Twitter, turned that into an X. You've got SpaceX. I think there's the Tesla Model X, if I'm not mistaken. There's a Model S and a Model X, right? There is. Not sure. Okay. But basically, Texas marks the spot. It's kind of the angle we're working with tonight, where you have this 2023-2024 intersection right kind of in the middle of Texas. You've got a lot of this culture shifting. Like I said, it's not just the tech companies. It's not just the industry. You've got all the comedians. A lot of this American culture we associate with like LA is kind of disappearing and popping up in Texas. So we'll just kind of tee off from there. That's the gist of the thumbnail and the associations being made. Elon Musk is not going to be the sole focus of this discussion, but like I said, that's where we're starting off. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I was just looking up the Tau cross for the T, and so this is an interesting correlation. I'm on the irishplace.com, and so they're breaking down all the different kind of meanings of the Tau cross. And I'm just reading off the website here. One of the most notable forms of these pre-Christian crosses is the Tau from its similarity to the Greek letter T. It's also the last letter in Hebrew, right? So we talked about the Aleph being the first, and the T or the Tau is the last in Hebrew. So you have the Alpha and the Omega. These crosses were often used by ancient Egyptians. In Hebrew, this letter is written as an X, but it's pronounced the same way. So there you go. There's your intersection between the T and the X, and the Tau cross is written up as an X in Hebrew. So it's a very interesting connection.
Absolutely. And I'm always fascinated with the fact that the Tau, right, obviously reminds me of Taurus. And then the Aleph, as you mentioned, is an ox, right, a castrated bull. And so the tarot reflects this, by the way. So the Fool card is associated with the Aleph, and then the Universe card is associated with the Tau. And so you start and end with this cross reference, either the T or the X, and also a bull reference, a Taurian sort of reference. And then obviously Texas is known for its steers and things like that. So I think that's very, very interesting. But yeah, there's a lot to chew on here, because also I've been getting into Libra symbolism, because that's the sign we're in tropically, and just the connection between the cross and also the scales, I would say. And so even in ancient Egypt, like the weighing of the souls ritual, if you want to Google that real quick, you know, you're going to see Anubis and you're going to see a little Thoth, and they're weighing a heart against a feather, the feather of Ma'at, who corresponds with Libra in so many different ways, you know, her feather of truth. And the main cross that you tend to see is very T-like, so it looks like a cross, right? And so I've been seeing a lot of connections with literally the scales of Libra and the cross and the X. And the way I tend to kind of associate it these days is that when you're dealing with the cross or you're dealing with the X, the number 4 tends to come to mind first and foremost with the X. Those 4 quadrants, 4 arms emanating from a center point. But that center point represents the 5th point. And so to me, I see a lot of associations with the number 5 kind of being this threshold sort of number, or this bridge, if you will. And so that's why it corresponds very nicely with the Hierophant card, right?
Right.
Pontifex Maximus, the ultimate bridge builder. And even literally the glyph that indicates the underworld for the Egyptians, they used a 5-pointed star to indicate Duat, the Duat or Tuat. And so their underworld was indicated with this 5-pointed star. And during Libra season, we're going into, the night side of the zodiac, right? To me, we're going into its root system. And so a lot of the underlife journeying symbolism that I tend to think about, it's really fusing together so nicely with Libra. It's kind of crazy. That's one of my big takeaways so far with this Libra season, is obviously this underworld sort of journey, which obviously Longo, we've talked about a bit here. But even in the weighing of souls, as you have up here, right? I mean, look at that T. It's very noticeable. It's obvious. And you need this vertical axis in order for scales to even work or be weighed. And I personally think that the cross was first a vertical line, that the standing stone preceded the cross, and then eventually it got its cross beam. And when you're dealing with standing stones and obelisks and even buildings and things like that, I tend to associate it with the world axis. And I'm coming across a lot of information that also links Libra and the scales with the world axis. Even in China, apparently, at least according to one of my resources, one of my favorite resources, it says that Ursa Major and Minor in the northern sky were basically considered jade scales. And when you look into scale symbolism, the kind of motionless center, the changeless center, the cosmic axis is brought up. And so that's something that I'm not the one to make this sort of correspondence, but a lot of other people before me have made this correspondence. So there's a lot of world axis symbolism with Libra that I think is very interesting.
China's a Libra country too.
Is it?
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine, China. Makes sense.
Right.
So guys, real quick, we've got another guest joining us.
Hey, doing?
Hey, Ben.
Ben, the archivist, waking up with analog, however you know
Right,
him.
Pleasure. Nice to meet you. Robert, good to see you again.
Hell yeah, man. So Ben, you joined us right here. We're talking about the T, the X, the tech that has been moving to Texas the last couple of years, the different industries that are setting up shop there, the X of the eclipse, the Eclipse, marking the spot there in Texas. And yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, I've been listening along. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love what Robert was touching on, because that's pretty much what I was going to bring to the table was, we talk about language so much. And yeah, he hit the nail on the head there. Alpha and Omega. Another really interesting correlation was that the Tau in Phoenician, in the oldest versions of it, looked very much like the glyph of Saturn. And again, beginnings and endings, Saturn kind of being the 7th before you kind of leave the physical bodies, or the heavenly bodies, or wandering stars. And,
True. Yes. Saturn exalting in Libra, which we were just talking about just now as well. Also, this brings to mind, if we're going to talk about voyages, apparently the Romans had limited knowledge of the Americas. But what they did know about, they saved for a I guess you could call it a Saturnian pilgrimage. They would wait for Saturn to go into Taurus to make a trip into the Gulf of Mexico.
Yep.
Across the Atlantic. So not sure how much of a connection there is there, but the we were talking about parallels before, some of the longitude and latitudes. The Tropic of Cancer sneaks in right between Cuba and Florida, right there into the Gulf of Mexico, which could be called the Gulf of Texas, the Gulf of Florida. Give us a couple of years on that, guys. We're going to petition the people that we need to make it the Gulf of Florida. But basically, TX, XT. Here we go. The Phoenician Tau. You've also got the T in the circle, which is symbol of the world in many cosmologies, Viking, Native American. So,
yeah, I mean that the cross was like the swastika was universal, it was everywhere. And Hebrew, Phoenician, older versions of Chinese, the alpha and omega overlay is really important. And you find the story of the Greek alphabet and the kind of the creation story of the Mayan and the Aztec correlate quite nicely. And, obviously the Mayan and the Aztec had quite a substantial presence in Texas, especially. But yeah, the Tau and the cross,
You bring up a good point. With the tech. This is something that I wanted to touch on, is right around the Gulf of Mexico area, you'll find a lot of tech words. Now, right here, I've got the official etymology for Texas. If we go over to here, they say Tejas or Teja or Tejas, Texas, Tejas, it became. Now that's, we're getting told, means friends or ally. Friend or ally. Texas. Now, who's heard the term, all my exes live in Texas? Right? If your ex lives in Texas, right. Robert's like, yep. If it's an ex, that's not your lover. Sometimes exes could be allies, friends. You get demoted from girlfriend to back down to friend, So there's a little bit of connection there. I always like the little kind of sayings and limericks that go along with each state, and I always try to assign astrotheology to them. But
well, there's an X in the runic system.
Oh shit!
Oh, where'd he go?
He popped out. That wasn't me.
He went through the portal in his eye.
He got text.
He went through that black hole sun in his eye.
We're having some Texas issues, guys.
He was about to bust something open. I was like, okay, let's go. Let's hear this.
The tech's acting sus. Mario, you back?
I'm back, dude. Did it cut me off?
Yeah. Right.
I was just going to say. Right. So the runic X is Gibo, which means gift, and it means exchange, right? And so it's two lines crossing over, having some sort of interaction with each other. So I can kind of see this friendly sort of dynamic, or this kind of compatibility or crossover between two people, just with the X itself too, right?
Yes. According to the Bach Saga, X is a symbol of Thor, but not just Jupiter himself, in the capacity that you're being Jupiterian to somebody else, meaning you're being benevolent, you're being jovial, you're linking with someone, you're trying to create compatibility or intimacy. This is the X. So they would call your best friend your X, or your Tor friend. So it's pretty crazy. I know if we're going to hold this to the Bach Saga, we've already got a huge connection with the Tex, the X in Texas, meaning friend, and then the T being associated with a rune. The X rune Thor. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Tech and Ek, according to the Bach Saga, has to do with the oak tree. So oak, Ek, X, these are the same words. That's why you axe a tree down. An axe is like Thor's hammer, sometimes a hammer, sometimes an axe. So the axe, the X, it's an oak X. Okay. This is, sorry. You're gonna say?
Well, I was just going to say I have to mention it because I'm kind of a world axis, northern symbolism sort of guy.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you use an axe to cut down a tree, which in my opinion, every tree is symbolic of the world tree, you know? So you use an axe to cut at the axis. I think there's a connection there with axe and axis.
Yes, there is. Also, Jupiter is the planet of excess, expense, expansion, expensive, expansive, excess, exteriors. X you'll find having a lot to do with Jupiter, the X prefix. Also, back to what Ben said about Aztec, Toltec, this suffix, I don't think the mainstream has a firm grasp of this suffix and tech and how it's being used around the Gulf of Mexico. In my own research, I see the Tequesta, the Aztec, the Toltec, and then Olmec. That's not a tech, but still, this ek suffix, this ek sound. To me, you also have a shit ton of live oaks around this area. So there's a bunch of oak trees. We have older oak trees in Florida than you have anywhere in Europe. And
there's a lot of oak trees in Texas too.
I'm sure there are.
A lot. Yeah.
Tecumseh, a lot of tech words around there.
So Texas is a Capricorn state, and so you were talking about Saturn earlier, and it also has a Capricorn moon. So it is a very flinty state in some ways, right? And the people really carry themselves in that way. Like if you treat them with respect, right, they'll treat you with respect back. You know, they're I wouldn't call them overly jovial. Maybe closer to Houston, where you're more in the South, which is a different vibe. But if you treat people here with respect, which is very Capricornian, they'll treat you with respect and they'll basically leave you alone, right? There are codes here in Texas, and they're all Saturnian codes in a lot of ways. You also see a lot of old people here. I mean, that's another part of the population. You know, it's the place we're moving to. The neighbor across the street, she's 100 years old, lives by herself, right? So there's that vibe in this place.
The X also, you know, John D talked about the X, and the symbol he used was the blindfold, and that, you know, everything was concealed behind the X, and it's kind of like makes me think of X marks the spot, the treasure, and you know, this again talking about the Saturn relation, the kind of subconscious mind in a way. But yeah, I always remember the blindfold, and you know, the initiates, all of the secret societies, the blindfold is, you know, your introduction into the craft, so to say.
Yeah, going back to oak symbolism, oculus, all oak words having to do with vision, right? Also go back to the ek, ook. You know, I know it stretches, but vowels don't exist the farther back you go back into written language, so not that big of leaps.
No.
Mario fell. Oh, here he is. I have to add him back. So, man.
Put some anchors on this guy so he can stick around.
I know it. Yeah, I think the rainy season is kind of doing its thing with our internet some way, somehow. I don't know how it works. But the blindfold, it reminds me of the fact that Lady Justice is blindfolded, and she corresponds with Libra, right? And so this initiation, I really think, has a correspondence with going into the dark side of the zodiac. between now and Pisces season, right? I was saying earlier, it's like kind of like our root system or whatever you might want to say. And it's just kind of interesting the holidays that occur, during this time of year. Right. Halloween, the Day of the Dead. We talked about that like a week or two ago, Longo. Also, I just want to mention the fact that the Saturn glyph itself also encodes a 5, right? And so the 5th thing kind of being the point of ascension, the middle of the X or the middle of the cross being the point where you cross over. And so when I see the X or the cross now, I really think of it as kind of like an ascension sort of symbol of crossing over to the abyss or to the other side. That's how I personally take it.
You've also got the T. You've also got the T, H. I've always seen it as an H myself. I don't know if I have any connections with that, but 5, you're the first person I've heard pointed out as a 5 to me. I've always seen Jupiter as a 4. What is Jupiter as a 4 and a... It's a 4 and a 2 together. 2 and a 4. That's how I always saw it. Was it's 6, like it's the 6th planet in the row of Moon.
Saturn with the Hierophant definitely is a 5.
Moon, mono, Mercury, the 2. So Moon, Mercury being 2, the duality. Venus being 3, Sun being 4, Mars being 5. And this is going up through the chakras from the bottom up. Jupiter being 2 plus 4, 6. So you have the 2 and the 4 in a symbol. Now, what about, I wonder if we can do that with
Oh,
keeps happening to everybody.
Wow.
right. Ben, when you came on, dude, my internet was glitching out, so I don't know. I don't think I had a chance to acknowledge you, but I just wanted to say, hey, it's nice to see you, man.
Nice to meet you, Mario. Pleasure.
Yeah, dude, you do good work.
Oh, thank you.
Shall sorry I popped out on accident, but yeah, feel free to mingle, guys. We don't, we're not on a train here or anything. But
I resonate with the 5 too, just because the X, when it came to alchemy, was always interchangeable with the V, which was 5. So I'm sure there's something to that. Exactly how far I would go with that, that's just something that I remember. But I love the blindfold. That's always stood out, because when they talk about the Tau and the cross and the blindfold, all of the priests, would cross their arms, and the mummies, a lot of the high ranking or whatever pharaoh types, they'd always have their arms crossed, and kind of like a salute, I would imagine, kind of like one of those.
Yeah, the X with the arms. It's a good point. Also, when you drop down a water tower, when you plunge down into the underworld, you drop down on one of those water parks, where the floor goes out from underneath you. You do that too.
You don't want to lose a limb, because X is also to cut off, or I think something like that, cut off or cross out, something like that.
For sure. Now, let me ask you guys this. I guess I'll try and ask you each if we don't drift away too far. Robert, starting with you. Oh, hang on. Mario, I think you're muted. Are you trying to say something? No? Okay. Never mind. Sorry. Robert, why do you think Elon Musk went from Twitter to X? What do you think his obsession with the X is? He's got his kid, try to name that thing X, but what's behind it?
Yeah, I mean, that was his first product, wasn't it? He created a version of PayPal called X. Him and his brother did that. And then PayPal bought them out, essentially. What is his obsession with X? I mean, I think it's probably close to what Ben and Mario are talking about. Like, it's some kind of access point, right? Or, the the world tree or the anima mundi or something like that, right? I mean, it feels like that's a target for him. Like X is a target, and what that target is, I think I understand what he wants to do with it, right? But it's definitely a target, and it feels to me like some kind of an access point. And I think he's got some kind of magical association with X, like he's pulling from it. It's also, which this is outside of text, but the X is also the crossroads, right? And we get into the four corners, we get into Robert Johnson and the deal with the devil, and clearly we are at a crossroads in many ways with our culture and our time. And Elon Musk has positioned himself to be kind of in the center of this crossroads with Twitter and the technology, which he's managed to kind of keep online. So I think it's a magical it's a magical glue. I think it's a sigil for him. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well said, Mario. I'll pose the same thing to you. Why do you think? What is it with Elon and the X? Why Twitter to X? What's the whole deal in your eyes?
Right. It really is. Just as we're kind of talking about, it's this crossroads sort of symbol, and so it represents to me, when I think about that, I think of the fact that we are crossroad, I guess, oriented people. We live between the physical and the spiritual realm, right? I think even literally the actual world we live in, there's elements above and there's elements below, right? So we kind of live in Middle Earth, or Midgard, if you will. And so the X represents that bridge between these different planes and these different domains. And so it's a heavy occult symbol, right? For so many different reasons. Right now I'm thinking of like when someone's dead, they have X'd out eyes, right? And so it's both a death and life symbol. So there's a reason why you're going to see crosses at the graveyards, right? Like all over the world as well, because it represents this crossing over. So there's kind of I would say it's interesting because there's a completeness with the X, but there's also this thing that means that it's like exiled, right? Or, blacklisted or something along these lines. So there really is this beautiful sort of balancing act with the X. I'm thinking of the word sex as well. I'm thinking of the word hex. I'm thinking of XX.
Aren't we all?
Right. So I'm starting to see a lot of symbolism with the scales and the X in and of itself. And as I brought up earlier, the cross or the T with the scales themselves and all of this X symbolism and going into the underworld and things like that. I think all of these things are pretty much related. Also, Robert, you said the target, Tor, right? The Torget. This is a reference to getting a bull.
Yes.
And then even go ahead.
Sorry, it's rude of me.
No, you're solid, man.
Robert actually taught me this connection. I think was the bull's eye is the cusp between Taurus, Gemini, being right across from the penetrative sharpshooter, the archer, across being the cusp of Scorpio, Sagittarius, bull's eye, Taurus, Gemini. So target is completely, I wish I'd picked up on that before, the target and bull's eye. Yeah.
And then centaur, so the bull killer, And then even literally the Target logo, being a bull's eye, right? And it's famously red. I associate this with Aldebaran, this huge red royal star. And so very orange, even just to the naked eye, and the fact that Target too, this is just me going on a tangent now, but the fact that they have a bull terrier as their mascot that they call Bullseye.
Wow.
They put a bull's eye over one of its eyes. I think is very telling. And then the fact too, the target symbol, the target glyph is the circumpunct, right? It's like the monad, or it's the godhead, or even it is the view of Saturn from a aerial sort of perspective. There's a lot of Saturnian stuff with Taurus as well that I see.
Yeah, beginning and ends. You know, and the Tao is often drawn with the circle, and I always talk about Janus and the monad. And you posted, I think someone said the X was singularity. And yeah, I agree with that. Crossroads, these are all kind of the same ideas. But the monad, I love that. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, the circle, and the dot or the T. The Tau is also the symbol of physical matter and our existence in this material realm.
Yes.
And why I always go back to the Saturn and the blindfold, and the kind of story of Saturn consuming his children into physical matter. So the ring and the T. And I don't think that's a coincidence why the glyph of Saturn was related to the Tau in Phoenician. And if you can work you can work alchemy and astronomy and all the symbols, all masonry goes back to those symbols too. The Royal Arch is just a triple Tau, which if you go back even farther is really just a monad, a circle with the T inside. It used to be an X, but all the cultures had different T's. But what is the Tau in the sky? I know that there's a constellation that's also always symbolic of the Tau. Robert, do you know? Or you guys probably already said it. I may have missed it.
No,
I don't know. Tell us.
I don't know. There's I'll dig around and refresh my memory. But
there's several crosses in the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's more than one. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, this also takes me to like sacred geometry, which is also very symbolic of man, man's existence in the material realm. And when cells reproduce, right, and they split apart, that same geometry is making T's constantly, X's as well, right? Sphere and the X and the singularity, as someone mentioned earlier, the monad. All you have to do is change the dimensions and go from one-dimensional drawing 2, 3, and 4. But I think, again, solar eclipses, and it's all like Robert was saying. I think they speak in symbols because there's so much more to a symbol than there is to a spoken word, right? Every language can have a similar understanding because we come from symbols, not from words. So what do you think, Robert?
I agree, and I was just perusing the internet, and the Southern Cross, which is in the southern hemisphere, is actually a constellation called Crux, Crux.
Interesting.
Right. So we have the Southern Cross in the heavens, and it's not far from Cygnus, which is another cross, right? So let's see, what is it near? Centaurus. The bordering constellations of Crux, which is the Southern Cross, are Centaurus and Musca, Musca. And then Cygnus. When you look at Cygnus, which is the goose, right? But it does look like a cross when you look at it. So it's another.
Well, yeah, and the crux was talked about a lot when we talked about Moses, and that the Ankh was called a crux, and then the serpent over the cross. I'm sure that's something astronomical, right? The serpent over the cross was the yielder of power, the one who understood the astronomical markers,
Right, could navigate through the sky, tell the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
tell the stories. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There it is. There's Crux.
Right. So, what I was going to say is, a lot of my research, my personal opinion, is that I think we've gone through several major symbolic ages. It appears to me like we live in a solar age. Previous to that was a lunar age. Previous to that was a stellar age, which is also the polar age. And so, like Longo, I think a lot of things actually go back to the North Pole, and there's a relationship with the North Pole and the northern sky with the pole star Polaris, right? And so I'm sure all of you guys have seen the maps where there's a central mountain you know, and then there's 4 rivers emanating from it. Longo, your research gets into this, right, as it relates to where you're at. And so that is a cross, right? That's a T. That's the crossing point. This is the stairway to heaven, would be the world axis, going from wherever you're at on Earth. Lots of belief systems basically indicated that our souls ascend to the northern sky upon death. So there is a cross that's associated as well with Polaris and with the northern sky. In my opinion, that's just how it works out. So the North Pole and the northern sky is the ultimate cross or crossroads. It's where the X marks the spot. And so to me, any holy city, any sort of pilgrimage journey anywhere where people are descending towards or ascending towards represents an emanation of this original sort of Garden of Eden paradise location. And so any holy land is speaking to that holy land. It's like a fractal of that holy land right there. And where there's a hole, there's a pole. Poles and holes. I think a lot of symbolism boils down to poles and holes. The world axis is a pole. There's also a receptive component with it. And so isn't it interesting that we're talking about people going to Texas, X marks the spot, all of these different symbols, and Texas is also the lone star state. So the lone star in the heavens, in my opinion, is Polaris. That's a reference to Polaris, the star of stars. There's no other star like it in the heavens. It's eternal, it's changeless, and it's the center that doesn't move. Right. And so the northern sky has been the location of God's throne and all of these other different types of ideas. So I see a lot of polar stellar symbolism in what's going on here.
It's a great
Yeah. Hey, and Lone Star, we're told, apparently comes from the fact that they had a lone star on a flag. I don't think it's that simple. You've also, as I've talked about, some of the crescent symbolism in the Gulf of Mexico. You've got the lone star also pointing to a kind of Taurus, cow, ox related. You know, you have the occidental, also with Libra, but you've got fertile crescent, like I've said, the Tau, the Texas. And Ben said that the Tau is the symbol of material, and that would have to be correct because the Taurus is where we get matador. So matter, mother, Mother's Day in May in Taurus. This is the sign of material density, matter itself. And then you have, I forgot what I was going to say.
Hey, Longo, isn't there a club in Miami called Poles and Holes?
Probably. But I think it's just poles and poles, to be honest. Or holes and holes is down the block. But
yeah.
Right. So I mean, to me, there are so many examples. Ben, I know you know about this kind of stuff, right? But like the Kaaba cube, right, being this northern reference, in my opinion. And actually, I'm reading right now, and I've been talking to people who are interested in esoteric Islam, talking about overt northern polar symbolism in esoteric Islam and Sufism and things of that sort. Right. But the Kaaba cube being symbolic of the lodestone, this central sort of mountain, right? Mount Meru or whatever you might want to call it. To me, these are all just very similar symbols. And the idea is that you go to this holy land, this central location, and then you revolve around the Kaaba stone, the Kaaba cube, 7 times. You know, to me, this is a reference of the circumpolar constellations going around the pole star, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And so there's this constant theme where wherever people go for their pilgrimage location, you can kind of bank on the fact that there's going to be polar northern symbolism baked into that location. There's probably going to be a central tree or some sort of monolith or obelisk or standing stone or something along these lines. And to me, these are all pretty much the same thing. It all references what you still have on the screen there.
Hyperborea, that, like I was saying earlier, with the X prefix, X can mean something that was, but it can also mean extra, right? Or expansive, abundant. Well, you find this with hyper as well. Hyperborea. Hyper is another Jupiterian or Sagittarian prefix indicating abundance or a lot of something. To be a hippie is to be Sagittarian, right? To be hip is to be cool, up with events, constantly moving. But to be a hippie is to be, ideally, to be virtuous, to be temperate, right? Things that go along with Sagittarian qualities and thus Jupiterian qualities. So the hyper, the hippo, the horse, hippopotamus, this all goes back to Jupiter being large animals, expansive. So the X and hypo, to me, are almost synonymous, and they have, I'd have to track down the etymology on those, but they indicate the same thing. It's saying something is X is saying it is oak-like. It's saying something is hippo is saying that it is horse-like or Jupiter or Sagittarian. Yeah.
Got it.
Hypocrites too, I guess. Yeah.
Very interesting. Ben, one thing I've wanted to tell you, dude, I heard you on Higher Side Chats, and I'm so glad you did a little section on the lodestone, because a lot of people don't, it's not their field of research or whatever. So I was just really pumped that you got into it. Are you aware, and maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but that the North Star was referred to as the lodestar as well? That's one of its many names. So again, just bridging this connection between the North Star and then the northern portion of Earth, and then creating totems around this sort of central stone, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, the lodestone are the, like Mecca. There are several Meccas all over the globe, and up until the 1800s, there was many. Salt Lake City has one. The Mormon temple was called Mecca.
Oh,
in the 1800s. There's a Mecca in Guatemala. There's many. But they all considered the stones to be pieces or fragments of the mother stone, whether that is Rupus Negra or the central stone.
Whoa, what did you call me? Whoa, what did you call me?
Or some even would say that they came from the that they fell from the heavens, and that lodestones were stars, burnt up stars. And all of these past mega religions and bodies of people, they all had a stone that was worshipped. Atlantis being the kind of foundation of that, right? The ringed city, the magnetic symbolism, obviously, but the monad being the key symbol there. And I've talked about Janus and how Janus works into the lodestone principle. The cross, why the eye symbology too in Egyptian, and the brain, and the idea of two hemispheres, and subconscious, and the kind of dualistic nature of mind. I think I mentioned it with Robert before, but Julian Jaynes, one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called The Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And he said that there was some kind of physical event that fractured the hemispheres of the brain. And that's what created personality. And everyone attributed that event to creating these kind of gods or idols, because they no longer had the inner voice of God, and that the stones were like living stones and were speaking. And they were put into statues, or in, like Mecca, and Ingham stones and Omphalos stones and the Ben capstones. The idea with the Ben is that it sits on a pyramid and its voice is like projected across the realm. It just reminds me of like the Tower of Sauron, because Babel was a symbol. People referred to it as this similar idea to what you were mentioning with the obelisks. And there's just so much there. And not a lot of people venture into that. And I really need to do more work on it, but I really want to start with Julian's book. And I just don't even know where to begin with that. But it's really amazing. But it all goes back to the Alpha and the Omega, and Janus being that, the two faces, the two hemispheres, the polar nature of everything in the physical realm, I should say. And what Saturn represents in that whole thing. And I love how you brought the target symbolism. Everything goes back to astrology, as everyone here is familiar with. But and I'm sure that the T and the X and the Twitter and the bird and the air in Texas, the owl, the owl Minerva was like one of the main symbols in ancient, Mayan or Aztec symbology. And I'm not quite sure how that works astrologically, but makes me wonder what how Minerva plays into it. If either anyone here can add to that, that'd be great. Like the owl is a symbol, that they were always thought that they were all knowing, kind of the omniscient creature because it could see everything.
Right.
In one
It had
position.
a 360-degree view, right? I mean, that was the
Right.
I've always associated the owl with the moon, even though the moon appears to be stationary and doesn't rotate, right? But I've always associated the owl with the moon.
Well, yeah, they all hunt at night for the most part, right?
That's right. It's lunar. Yeah, it's a lunar creature. Yeah.
And their faces are always very like, kind of like radar dishes.
They're very
Yes.
moon-like. They're moon-like.
And you mentioned that they don't, although they don't twist. I would say that moon, what we're told, right, heliocentric,
Right.
whatever, that it's twisting with us almost on like a gear. It's fixed to the angle, and so it's always showing us its face. You'll hear this folklore about owls, that you'll never see the back of an owl's head. Could you describe the back of an owl's head to me? You probably couldn't, because it seems like they're always looking at you.
Yeah,
and even when you see one, exactly, yeah.
It's like the opposite of the blindfold. It sees everything.
Mm-hmm. And that's the nerves, like you said, Minerva, my nervous system, Nerva, seeing all things without necessarily.
Owls are always nervous.
And you say, ow, ow, ow,
Yeah.
owl, right.
So bringing this back to Tech Talk, one of the most important computers of all time came out of Texas, and it was the TRS-80 by the Tandy Corporation, and they sold millions and millions of these computers, and the first operating systems were written by Bill Gates and Paul Allen and Bill Joy. And what's interesting about Tandy, of course, Tandy comes out of Radio Shack. And Radio Shack comes out of Tandy. Tandy was a company that was involved with leather, right? A very Texan kind of company. So they would create leather goods, and then the son, who inherited the company from the father, decided he wanted to take it into a different direction. And so these Radio Shacks were like these small sort of, scattered failing chains, that he bought them. And then he began to turn them into, what we know as Radio Shack. But this is really sort of this is the first piece of personal computing. It's the TRS-80, and it came from Texas. And what's interesting is that the guy who he hired to basically oversee this operation is a Scorpio, right? And we think of Scorpio, especially with Uranus and Scorpio, as being exalted in innovation. And that's what all these guys were building these computers, was Uranus and Scorpio. And then the owner of the company is a Taurus, right? So you have the guy who's coming out of the leather world and the cow world as a Taurus. He's born May 15th. And then this other guy, I believe his last name is Roach. He comes along. He's a Scorpio, born 11/22, and he transforms. You have the Alpha and the Omega again, right? You have Alpha with Taurus, and Scorpio is the Omega, and this is the byproduct of it. It's a really an interesting story that relates to what we're talking about with Texas and tech, and even T as being, Texas Instruments, TRS-80.
Yes. Also, going back to the owl, a good comment. Old World Micmac, shout out. Old World OW, Saturn rules to me that which is old and the world, Lord of this world, in the words of the Bible. Owl, Old World Florida is ALF, OWF. But what if we were Old World Louisiana? You would have your owl, right? So OW, owl, also being the abbreviation for Old World.
Nice.
Yeah, the reason I brought up the owl was, one of the in the 1800s they uncovered a crazy temple. At first they didn't really know how to classify it. They couldn't really say it was Aztec because it was quite different. And they wanted to kind of say Grecian because they kept finding owls everywhere. And they found what they thought to be the main temple, and they thought that it was a temple to Minerva in Texas, of course. That's what brought it to my mind. So I think they were well aware of this, obviously, in past ages, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into some of that, the ancient archaeology of Texas. And part of the reason why I'm very excited to be going over to Texas, not only for Robert's event, but also that it's a bit of a gold mine when it comes to hidden history and hidden archaeology and things like that. Namely, you have Rockwall, Texas. Now, who knows what Rockwall, Texas is really named after? A big old rock wall. And I know, Ben, you're very familiar with not only this rock wall, but a whole slew of large megalithic walls around the Gulf Coast, Mississippi, Louisiana. They're very real. They're still there. You can go touch some of them, especially
from Guatemala all the way to the Mississippi. There are giant walls that probably, they go all the way into Peru. So I would imagine that just like the Great Wall of China, and even in the 1800s, they were saying that this is a continuation, was their exact wording, of the Great Wall of China, and it was similar in so many respects.
Now that sounds like a stretch, but remember we were talking earlier, what were they calling Mexico City for the longest time? Chinapas, isn't that true? China,
Yep.
Chinapas.
Well, and what was Columbus in his own literature? They're told that he didn't know where he was going, or that's what the narrative is today. We know better than that, right? But in his own literature, what did he call? Where was he going? He was going to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And when he landed in Cuba, he was like, "We're in Asia." He wasn't confused. He didn't think that there wasn't a landmass between what we call Asia. And this is like, again, with the Olmec and the Z kind of Mecca, Mecca and
Mexico.
the Olmeca. Yeah, Olmeca and the Guatemala. There were sacred stones, and all the Buddhists had sacred stones. Their temples were filled with sacred stones that could speak. You carried sacred stones with you for protection, blah, blah, blah. And, even the Olmec, the mushroom, right, which is Saturnian in its classification. Well, the Olmecs would consume mushroom, what they called the flesh of Quetzalcoatl. They had a different term for him, but a similar idea, flesh of the dragon. And they'd march along the telluric lines that they could see in the ground, and they'd stop and build a city on a cross. So wherever these telluric lines, dragon lines, whatever you want to call them, wherever they crossed, that's where they would build a city. And they found that water followed these lines. So there'd always be like a cross of underground streams at these same T's. So I'm sure as above, so below, these kind of energetic lines are above as well as below, and long roundabout way before we get off the wall symbolism. But I'm sure walls like water and lines and tellurics were all connected.
Love it. So guys, who has heard and who hasn't heard of the Rockwall in Rockwall, Texas? This is real. It's not recent. It's not a natural formation. Much of it looks like sandbags, like hardened earth or petrified bags of earth, something you'd expect to find today. Something Christopher Gardner might be working on in a backyard somewhere. Bags of earth that end up getting hardened into stone. That's what some of this looks like. Or they could be stones themselves, but it's pretty consistent sizing. It's not the whole way all the way. Thus, it's not the whole. It's not the same style all the way. There's portions, there's sections, there's breaks in the wall, but the
breaks are like doorways, and they're way, way below ground. In fact, they dug 60 feet or more, and I don't know what the narrative is now, but I talked about this in my Anomalous America Texas episode, as well as Louisiana and Mississippi. And with most of these walls, they never reached the bottom, and they found that the stone got more cyclopean, as they would say. It kept getting bigger and bigger. The wall got wider, and the stones got larger as they went down. And in any of these articles, never did they ever reach the bottom. They were like, this is too much work. We don't know where the bottom is. That was the narrative with all of them. And before they even started digging, they used them as roads. So the walls in Louisiana and Mississippi, they called highways, ancient highways. And with some of the exploration that went on in the late 1700s and 1800s in Mexico, they had the same thing. They called them highways, but then they eventually found, a flood would wash away enough, and they'd be like, oh, this is an actual wall. And then you look at the Great Wall of China, which they called a wall forever, but it was a highway, right? And what for? It's quite interesting too, especially when we think about the idea of these big monsters. But what makes the rock wall in Texas fantastic, unlike the ones in Mississippi and Louisiana that were all completely destroyed and used as quarries, they still have it. And when they did, they broke down the what made up the rock, they found all these exotic minerals, like titanium, all kinds of stuff that couldn't have happened by nature, that it was formed and created, shaped by man. But these materials were like not even found, some of them on the same continent, let alone within hundreds of miles. And I've postulated, the kind of Atlantean concept, because in Atlantis, they talked about the walls were glowing and they were like electrified. And I think this is probably something along that same line.
Dog chow.
Sorry. Yeah, anyways, that long answer there, but yeah, the wall there is amazing because it's still there.
Yeah, like you mentioned, with some of the strange materials, the sandstone is made of quartz that has been cemented by additional quartz. That's coming to us from the Dallas Morning News. Another takeaway here is this is a plotted out section. I mean, you've got right angles. You've got 20 miles, 20 square miles. The known sections of just the rock wall encompass 20 square miles.
Yeah, and the old reports, they estimated, I think, hundreds. I can't remember the exact number, but it was upwards of 300 or 400 miles. Because they would lose sight of it. It like went into hills. It like went into mountains. And then they would find it like 40 miles away. So they were like, well, we don't know if it's connected, but it's the same type of construction. So we're assuming it must be a continuation. Same thing with the Mississippi one. They estimated it could be over 1,000 miles long.
Yeah, this is just the one Rockwall County rock wall. But there's other rock walls in Texas. There's ones in Mississippi, Louisiana. Ben shared plenty of articles about some of these. And let's go back, look at some of these pictures. A lot of people don't believe this, or they'll say, oh, they cut into something halfway and it just looks like that. No, this is a rock wall. It's tall, it's huge, just like Ben said it is. Even if this guy's 7 feet tall, you're still looking at least a 30-foot wall, at least.
Pictures of the bottom. Because I think even now, there may be some kind of storyline that's been created around it, but I doubt they've reached the bottom. Like I was saying, they went 60 feet. Like that's probably the 40 feet there. In the 1800s, they were down 60 plus feet, and the stones were getting huge, humongous.
Yeah. I mean, look at how nicely those ones are laid.
The riverbeds here, you can almost see perfect slabs that are cut at right angles, right? So there's also something going on in the riverbeds. If you poke around, and you'll find it.
Yeah, I've gone as far as to say that the entire American Southwest, southern part, Texas included, that all the water formations were completely sculpted by man, or at least controlled in some way or another. All the water from Southern California all the way through New Mexico, nearly every one of the rivers was artificially manipulated or completely created. And they're just canals that over time and being buried by sediments and so on and so forth have taken on the look and appearance of a natural river, but are far from it. I mean, the ones in Arizona, when it was in a desert, so it hadn't been buried under so much earth like many of the other places. But they found ones in Colorado that they thought it was a river, and it had a crazy enough snow that the melt was a crazy flood, and it washed enough of the dirt away that they found huge stone footings, and you could tell that basically it led to some kind of damming or something along those lines.
There's maybe Longo can bring this up. There's a formation not far from Kerrville called Enchanted Rock, and it's this massive earth mound, just comes up out of nowhere. There's nothing else around it, and it looks to me like if you go beneath sort of the surface rock, it looks like a giant cement dome. This thing. And it's really unusual. And I've hiked around.
Oh, dude, this is a total. Sorry, I'm just seeing it for the first time. I just pulled it up. This is a total Bach Saga style royal mound, where that's just what they believed, that they were bubbles of granite, bubbles of this hard crust stone that came up to the top, and they would always put their most royal cities on top of those bubbles like that.
Yeah, the story about building your what's the phrase? The Dome of the Rock, build your temple or your home on a solid. What's the phrase that I'm trying to build your
Don't know.
On a solid footing, a solid foundation.
Right. Solid ground or something like that.
Yeah. You'd always want to build on the rock, on bedrock. Right. It doesn't matter how beautiful or strong your temple is. If it's built on dirt or earth, it's gonna, and one little earthquake, it's gonna be gone.
If you look at this, so Longo, you should check this place out.
I'm going.
It's like pieces are peeling off of it.
The pieces are peeling off, and you can see it almost looks like it's concrete. Like a giant poured concrete structure. And the exoskeleton is peeling away. It's a really interesting formation. And the area around it's really interesting too. It's like all these weird kind of other rocks that look kind of cement-like, look like kind of anchors coming up out of the ground. It's really a trippy place.
Thank you, man. I will be going there.
So our first year when we did the event, I rented buses. I lost my ass in that event. And so we went to Enchanted Rock. And before, at a certain point in time in Texas, you could just show up at a state park like this, and you could just buy a ticket and they'd let you in. But then they got really official with it. So you had to make reservations to go to all these places. And they had done that in between the last time I had gone to Enchanted Rock. It wasn't like that. So we pull up with all these buses and all these cars, and we're supposed to have reservations. And the guy comes up to us and asks us if we have reservations. And I'm driving this bus, and I'm sitting next to this woman, Natasha, and I could kind of feel this interesting linkage where it's like, if we don't say anything and we just kind of hold this positive space, we're getting in. And the park ranger phoned into the to the office And he told them what we had. He said, "Do we have any spots?" They said, "Yeah, come on in." So it was this really interesting moment where people thought we wouldn't get in, but we did. And the rock kind of lived up to its name, right? It was kind of an enchanted moment that, we sort of slipped under the wire for this thing. It was really cool.
Sure, yeah. And that was the first one you did? The first gathering?
That was the first year we went to Enchanted Rock. We did Tai Chi at Enchanted, or yoga. We did yoga at Enchanted Rock.
Nice.
At least some people did. I don't think I did.
I was just going to say regarding the wall stuff, this is fascinating to me. And I'm just going through my like Rolodex in my mind about wall symbolism. And I'm just curious if there's any like folklore kind of storylines about this wall in any way, shape, or form. I'd be curious to know that because it's possible. When I've read about wall symbolism before, it generally comes up with Gemini, actually, of all signs, with hero twins, just like Romulus and Remus in Rome. They're credited for building the first wall in Rome and establishing Rome, hence Romulus, Rome, right? And my understanding is this goes back to a Babylonian sort of idea or concept, which where did that come from? And then where was that really? Where did it originate and all that kind of stuff? But Gemini season being the time of year when it was opportune to start baking bricks under the sun again. And so Gemini season to the Babylonians, my understanding is that it was referred to as the brick mold. And so this is when they would resume construction projects and things like that because the sun was out and it was favorable to do that. And I think you're seeing some of this being encoded in the star card with the Gemini twins, the twins being in front of a brick wall. You'll notice that in a lot of older sun cards. I don't know if I just said sun card or star card, but in a lot of older sun cards, you're going to see two children in front of a brick wall. Gemini symbolism corresponds with the sun too, and this return of the sun sort of concept and everything. And I think it's interesting that we have Freemasons who call each other brothers, and there's so much twin pillar symbolism going on within Freemasonry and Kabbalah and Judaism and things like that. So there's a whole entire sync and weave with Gemini twins, one good twin, one bad twin, constructing this wall together brick by brick. And generally they have opposing ways of doing things. So I think in the Romulus and Remus tale, one of them is like playing music and floating bricks into place, while the other one is literally, hands-on with the bricks and stuff. But I was kind of surprised to see that there's other brick sort of fairy tales and folk stories and wall building stories that have to do with these twins. So I'm just wondering if that would pop up here or not, but something to chew on.
Well, I want to bring this back to Julian Jaynes and what Ben was talking about with Julian Jaynes and the split between the right and left hemispheres, and which is Gemini, right?
There you go.
And that place between the split is like the wall between the two, right? So
yeah, Romulus and Remus, they're just backwards spelling of the twin sons, because Romulus is Sumer, or Remus is Sumer, summer, and Romulus is a similar things. It basically is just two suns, or the two hemispheres. And
ooh,
brilliant, dude.
I like that.
And the Roman thing, I've done a few videos on the Etruria, the founding of Etruria, and Genoa. Janus. Genoa is named after Janus, the founding of Venice. Supposedly, the story goes that the Ark left the Gulf of Florida and landed in the Mediterranean, and Noah was actually Janus and repopulated the realm in Italy, or Etruria. And when you study Aztec symbology as well as their kind of mythos, it overlays almost identically with the Etruscan, and that overlays almost identically with the Kalevala. And obviously, we've shown enough infinity between the languages and everything, but it just always comes back to, as the Bible being a kind of astronomical story, it would be no different. And but yeah, when they were first studying the Aztecs or remnants of the Aztecs in the 1800s, the people who said that they were still closely affiliated, directly related, they called them half breeds or Etruscan half breeds, and that the wall making, city building, because Montezuma, he said that he was brought from the east to Titlan, and it was a chosen city, and that Titlan, which is I've shown a million times over, has more overlays with Atlantis than any other city in the realm. At least it did until the Spaniards invaded and buried all the lakes and filled in all the canals, but he was brought there by the Finns, the Irish, or whoever you want to. It gets a little convoluted who were the Irish of that time period. But when you see the correlations between the Etruscans and the Finnish and the Irish and Babylonian language, and again the Minerva temple I mentioned earlier, the walls and all this stuff, I think it's the similar time period, because you can see an infinity between the Spaniards' first descriptions of Titlan, right? Longo, as you know, they were like, this is Venice. Like, look at this. This is even more beautiful. They said it was even more beautiful and more advanced than Venice. And, it was a ringed city. It started in the middle and worked its way out. And there was a million, they had the same Noah myth. They had the same flood myth. They had the boat, the ark myth. They came from an island where everyone lived in peace and unity, so to say. And there was some kind of cataclysmic events, and the dispersion and the Babel story and the flood and the Ice Age are all kind of related to one particular incident, not millions of years and several different incidents. Long rambling there, but yeah, what was your buddy's name, the Italian guy? Before I mutilate his name, but
Dylan Sicoccio.
Dylan, yeah, we talked a lot about this in that episode. So if anyone hadn't seen that yet, I go back and watch that. But just the geometry between the Gulf of Mexico and the Mediterranean is enough for you to go, this is like, how is this? There's too many 99% accurate similarities for it to be coincidental. So how could you not see that the Nile and the Mississippi are literally just mirrors of each other, like the hemispheres of the brain, which is my long roundabout way of getting back to this, that all of this astronomy and language and mythology and religion all goes to one point, and are one similar point, I would say, and it's the brain. It's like, it's always this kind of story of the human body and our journey from spirit into physical matter, and kind of why they've worked so hard to remove Saturn and make him out to be the devil, and why he became the sixth planet instead of the seventh. And but I think it's very much related to what started all this conversation, at least when I got here, was the Alpha and the Omega. And Julian Jaynes shows that all of these ancient myths are about an event that fractured the mind and created the subconscious and the conscious, or at least access to both, and an understanding of your analog eye. Whereas before, all the ancient writing and all the old stories, they were basically saying God was telling them in their head, and they were just writing things down. That was what a scribe did. He was just like the pen for God.
Did you catch this comment, Ben, as you were talking down here?
Oh yeah,
Enoch.
I've talked about Enoch and the Janus myth, and that you can find the book of Enoch. All of those stories almost line up exactly what we were just talking about. They talk about giants. They talk about a war in heaven, and whatever that means specifically. Aliens, or whatever people want to take. The chopping of trees, right? In Texas, in the 1800s, they found hundreds of miles of petrified forest. In fact, some of the trees were over 900 feet tall. They had just some kind of event had buried the trees and knocked them over. And I would assume these are all broken. They found tree stumps that were vertical, still standing, where the tops had been completely busted, and the tree stump was still 150 feet tall.
Wow.
So just imagine how big. You know, in Galveston in the 1800s, when they were building some bigger buildings and adding onto the railroad, they found an entire city under Galveston, and hundreds of bodies, thousands, and that Galveston got hit by some massive tidal wave. And you know, Longo and I have talked about the Chicxulub crater, and you know, the kind of idea that a meteor hit in the Gulf of Mexico, and a lot of the Aztecs and Mayans worshipped fragments of this meteor, and perhaps that the desolation in the buried city in Galveston was showing, you know, remnants of this city. But
Downtown Galveston looks really old.
yeah, imagine what's below it.
Yeah. I mean, it looks old. It feels old. You know, it's just.
Yeah, I had some notes ready, and since Longo got disconnected, I'll just read you some. Oh, he's back. I'll just read it real quick here. This is from 1891. A prehistoric city near Galveston engulfed by a tidal wave. Relics of a prehistoric race discovered. 2,000 human skeletons. Ancient city submerged, drowning all the inhabitants. Skeletons of whole families were found. Ivory beads, and it's a fairly long article, but yeah. So they found 2,000 skeletons, and this is in the 1890s. But that's everywhere. The bayous show the same thing. The wall, how could a wall that we talked about in Texas, that's 60 feet at least tall, same in Mississippi, Louisiana, what kind of event would it take to bury something that large? Because when you look at how much sediment's left over from a flooding river or a tidal wave, they have quite a. Obviously, it varies depending on where the flood is, the river it was in, the mountains, you know, all that. But they have a calculation on how much debris is left over after the water recedes. And it just really strengthens the whole kind of deluge idea, right? And they find giant oysters on, you know, there's not a lot of mountains in Texas, but the highest elevations in Texas, they found 10, 12-foot oysters on the tops of the mountain. And this is like the story of Mount Everest. The first man to ever climb Mount Everest said that when he got to the top, he found giant 12-foot oyster shells.
Yep, those are on the Everest. They're also on Mount Ararat.
Yeah,
as well. The large oyster shells, big.
I have a tendency to steer us off of the subject, so
you're good.
No,
You're solid, dude. Fascinating stuff.
Paths, man. They're good
I
paths.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Real quick, just regarding Alpha and Omega and these the Gemini twins and this split sort of idea or polarity or whatever you want to call it. Just thinking out loud over here, you know, but the West Coast and the East Coast, are they emblematic of two different pillars? You know, there's a lot to be said about how they kind of contrast each other, right?
Longo and I've talked about that with California and Florida.
Nice. There you go. Exactly. Yeah, 100%. There's a ton to go off with that, right? Yep. And so whenever you have these two pillars, again, the Gemini glyph is just two vertical lines. It's Roman numeral 2. These are the same pillars in Freemasonry, Boaz Jachin. And even you can see some, I don't know if it's Masonic tracing boards, but I have some tarot cards, right, where the two pillars in a card are literally indicated as Alpha and Omega. So whenever you have these two pillars, columns, poles, there's an implied third pole. There's a middle way. There's a middle path. There's a true path of ascension. And is that what's being created here in Texas? Is what I'm trying to say.
I think so. They called the separation of the hemispheres the wall, and in kind of Buddhic and Indian culture, Hindu culture, the Buddhists say the same thing, that, you know, through meditation and physical or all of these practices, these kind of spiritual exercises, that all you're doing, it's like kind of like Jacob's ladder, that you're finding your way through the wall or your way over the wall into the subconscious mind. And then that there's like a steadfast barrier, so to say. So I love that. And, you know, in all the old Masonic drawings, that's all they're talking about is the two dualistic nature of the mind of man. And all is mind. All is mind. This whole realm is created by mind. And it's, you know, that's the Mayas had the same thing. That's why they're called the Maya, right? A term that's universally found all over the world. just means illusion. This realm is illusion. And yeah, I like that idea that you said there. I think that that's totally true. I mean, just think about, what's Trump. Trump is always talking about the wall, and there's no coincidence that Texas is like kind of it's the biggest topic. It's the state with the biggest focus on this kind of wall concept. And if I remember correctly, his touring of the wall was always in Texas.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm sure there's no coincidence there. And when you guys talk about Florida and California being the kind of hemispheres, Texas always to me is like kind of pineal, that lone star, the single eye. And you just turn the flag of Texas straight up and down, and it's kind of that same thing, the two pillars.
There you go,
right?
Dude.
And you're walking up the center to the platform, because on the old Masonic emblems, you always had the Jacob's ladder or the stairway to heaven,
Right.
and the star was at the top. People
lone star or the lone stair.
Lone stair. What do you mean?
Jacob's ladder.
Yeah, stairs.
Oh, stair.
Star.
I was thinking. Look, stair. Yeah. Absolutely.
The stairway to heaven. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's either it was always a staircase or a ladder or whatever, ascension or whatever that means to people. It's always, everyone has their own opinion, but there's that map that just made me think of it. Like, look at Texas just sitting there in between Florida and California.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
Also, to tie everything together here, what does tex mean actually in English? The prefix tex, that root word means to tie together.
Really?
To stitch. Yes, textile.
Oh, okay.
To stitch, to tie together, to sew together, to needle something and then bring it closer together. Let me check that.
Yeah, I have the etymology app on my phone, and it's like literally one of the most commonly used apps on my phone. And I should have done my due diligence before we even started talking about it. But
so art, okay. The letters of the name are meant to represent the capital Greek letters tau, epsilon, and chi. Ooh, we should. Tex is an abbreviation of Texan or Techna, Greek for both art and craft, which is also the root word of technical.
And that's like that's totally symbolic of the two hemispheres. In fact, that's like part of the symbology of my tattoos. On one side, I have formation and creation, right? You have the art, the subconscious, and the craft, like your actual physical hands working, in the taking the material or the mind and physically working in the physical realm. Say 10,
right,
and the number 10, and the idle hands do the devil's work. You find so much the symbology about the symbol, what hands can do. They can murder a man, or they can, blah blah blah. But that's fantastic. I love that. To weave. Yeah, it's like it's like geometry, right? The old philosopher saying that that's the loom of God, right? Weaving the universe, mathematics and geometry, and the craft.
Yeah, and also that's the first half of Texas. Second half, the word, gotta get into it. Okay, one of my favorite words, ass, Texas. Now they wire.
Man, huh?
Don't even get me started. Okay, guys. Big tits are for stupid people, dumb people, criminals, drug addicts, welfare statists are the people who like big titties. Go look it up. It is proven. Underachievers are obsessed with tits. Overachievers, high-functioning people. Well, sorry, I didn't want to open up that can of worms, but yes. Okay. So ass is one of the most demonized words in English, okay, in the English language in the world.
So how do you line that up with ghetto culture?
Well,
That seems to contradict your position just slightly.
Robert, I think you're opening up that's an
A
uncomfortable
can of whoop ass is what I'm opening up here.
conversation there. Now, I mean, I guess you're right. You're right. High functioning people seek athleticism, and athleticism is compatible with a big butt, but it's not compatible with giant
Well,
titties.
if you're a male that wants to,
No.
if you're a male
Unless you
that
have back
wants to-
problems.
No, if you're a male that wants to procreate in large numbers, you want a woman that has large breasts so they can suckle all your kids, right? I mean, there is a theory that
Yes.
I'm not objectifying women in that way, but I mean that's kind of like looking at it from that. Like I want to start a dynasty. I need somebody who can birth that dynasty and feed that dynasty. I think that
Yes.
probably falls into that category.
No, you're going to be looking at the hips, Robert. Unless you're a little bit of a child yourself.
They usually go hand in hand.
Unless,
Easy.
not you. No, I'm not saying he. I'm not saying you. I'm saying unless someone is a bit of a child themselves, they would want to take the place of that child, and then they would want larger breasts. That's kind of the studies they've done with poor people being obsessed with breasts. Right.
Well,
that
I
is,
mean,
that is a
obviously-
concrete connection.
I agree with Robert and you because I can see both. If it's like obviously you grow up and you're like for me, you know, I still have young children and my wife is still breastfeeding, so I see every day a child who loves breast, you know, and then my middle son who still loves breast, but his little brother's now taken over his territory. And I think that there's an argument for both cases for sure. I mean, without a doubt, it's just like you look at boobs and they're comfort and safe and all the things that a child sees for sure. So I still see it every day. And, you know, with 3 boys, you know, it's like I'm always last on the list. So it is an interesting thing though. And I think it's definitely ingrained in us. And I think if you're a man, I remember when I was you know, in my 20s and I started to think about looking for a woman that would raise my children, your mind changes completely, you know, and the ideas of things that you see and look for. That is something I agree with Robert. Whether or not it's subconscious or conscious, I think it can be both for anybody. But when you really start to look at it, and like, you know, for me, especially just seeing my little kids, it's like, it's totally a fixed part of the, you know, women, girls and boys, you know, little girls love their mama's boobs too. It's like, how could you would want to grow up and naturally that's something that I think anybody would think as a more suitable trait if you're considering having kids and, you know, being a mother and all those things. Obviously there's a lot to that, but yeah, weird tangent we just went on there.
But there's also
It's not weird. It's not weird because Texas has the biggest butts and biggest titties of any state, if I've heard correctly.
Yeah. Well, I've been to Houston a few times, and it is quite startling.
There is in a lot of cultures there is a status to be with a woman who looks absolutely fertile and productive, right? Like
curves
that's
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like they're prized in certain cultures. So, but I could also see where Longo's coming from too, because it does kind of represent stages like delayed development.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I was saying too. If you're, without a doubt. And I think, you know, obviously the porn culture has really amplified this. It's quite easy to realize and see it in today's culture, in American culture or European culture or whatever you want to call it. But you go to a lot of places where we're far removed and it's still very much the way it was 1,000 years ago. You can see a lot of those traits, you know, even in Asia, you know, boobs are obviously not as a big of a thing there, but, you know, big butts that's a big common trait, especially for a working class woman who's working still and raising kids. It's like part of the genetic download.
True.
But yeah.
Mario.
Yes. Yes to all of it.
Tap,
I'm okay with all of it.
Tap you in here.
You know, I mean, I know what you're saying. I've heard that before, but I think all of you guys are making great points, to be honest. But I do have stuff on ass as it relates to the donkey whenever you're wrapped up here.
Dude, I think we're gonna have to do another one. We're gonna have to do like
that could be a whole show.
We're gonna have to. Yes, we're gonna have to do like a WrestleMania on like tits versus ass, like tap in debate symbolism show.
Right.
I think a lot of that too is very cultural in terms of like when you grew up, right? Like if you grew up in the 50s and the 60s,
Hmm.
you were fed images of Jane Mansfield and Marilyn Monroe and Raquel Welch. I mean, these were the images of Aphrodite that the media was pushing out, right? But then if you go down the line a little bit further, the images of women and sexuality change greatly.
Yeah,
They're not
definitely.
the same. So
Mhm.
a lot of the time, what a man's image of sexuality or sensuality is formed by the culture and the images that
Without a doubt. Yeah,
he's
and that's
grown
what I
up
was
with.
saying about how it's changed so
Yeah,
much. Yeah, for sure. I mean, look at, plenty of people have seen pictures of like what a beach looked like in the 70s, and you take that same thing and you look at a beach in the 1800s, although obviously pictures are harder to come by and you don't really see people like vacationing, so to say, on the beach. But
yeah.
yeah, society has definitely been, their opinions of what's attractive have been shaped drastically by culture,
And I
without a
think
doubt.
maybe even to Longo's point that the pushing of those images during that time in the 50s and the 60s did create kind of a prolonged like infantilism, right?
Without a doubt, I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
the starting of the porn culture started there, right?
that's
But
right.
wouldn't you say it was Marilyn Monroe, or it was someone? I think it was Marilyn Monroe. But didn't Playboy start in that
Marilyn
same?
Monroe was the
I thought it was Happy Rockefeller.
first naked. I think she was the first naked centerfold in Playboy.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Makes
yeah, and
sense.
then the military was distributing all of that stuff to its servicemen, and
that's
the
right.
the culture was created there.
Prior to that, you had like the pinup girls, like Betty Grable and Lana Turner,
Mhm.
and who'd wear bathing suits. But if you go onto YouTube, which I've done by the way, not YouTube, Google, and you type in these old starlets naked, like they have all these nude pictures of these old movie stars because they were doing something else on the side, right?
Yeah. Okay.
They just weren't pinup girls. They had like a whole other like bag going on.
Yeah,
Uh,
escorts. A lot of them were.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In fact, do you know Marilyn Monroe had 6 toes? Do you know
Hmm.
that?
No, I did not.
No.
Interesting.
Christ.
Weird little Marilyn Monroe trivia. Who's a Gemini, by the way?
Ah,
Makes
interesting.
sense. She was bipolar. She suffered
Yes,
crazy.
her and JFK. Were they both Geminis, if I'm not
Both
mistaken?
Geminis.
Or
Yeah. They're both
okay,
Geminis.
not only that, they both had grand trines in air. Grand
Right.
air trines, both of them.
And she slept with the brothers. Right. She slept with RFK as well, which is
Did
very
she?
Gemini. Oh yeah. She had them both.
Ew.
Oh yeah, she was whether or not it was, passed around or whatever. There's a lot of interesting books out there about
Was
the subject, but
was she a Thule Society Nephilim Mossad agent, six-toed lizard?
She has
Or
this weird period of her life where she's living on Catalina Island. And she's married to some guy. They never talk about this guy. He was in the service. And she looks really, really different, right? But I've always felt like Catalina was really weird. Like it's got this weird vibe. That who knows what's going on inside the mountains in Catalina?
they found thousands of 8-foot giants on Catalina Island.
Yeah. It's an odd place, and I wouldn't be surprised if she went through some kind of programming. And of course, Anton LaVey claims that he seduced her when she was singing at a club in Kansas City, right? So she's got just this really weird. She doesn't live very long, but man, her life is really fucking strange. She marries all these dudes. Joe DiMaggio, who's a Sagittarius, by the way. So you had Gemini Sag with Jolt and Joe, and then Arthur Miller, which was a really weird marriage. Like she marries this nerdy playwright. Like it's just really strange shit. Bizarre life, and then it ends in a really bizarre way too.
Symbolism is deep.
I've heard that she was a dude as well.
Yeah.
Catalina's
Same
a
here.
crazy place.
It is crazy.
You're muted.
You're muted. There you go.
Not trying to be a contrarian here, guys. I don't think Marilyn Monroe is. She just doesn't do it for me. Okay.
It's a cultural thing.
She's got this big kind of jaw. She's got like this structure going on that I see it. If people are gonna say men,
Yeah.
I think the story with her
She
is
had
always
super
been,
broad shoulders, and
Yes.
you see pictures of her next to other men, and JFK wasn't known for his masculinity, but I'm sure she had a larger frame than he did, especially his brother. I mean, he was a small dude.
Barney Boyle. Not a good comment. Go watch more videos. Okay, the answer's in there. If people are still afraid of sugar at this late into the discussion, man, got to turn off that TV. Got to close those fear-mongering magazines. Okay, sugar, fruit does not equate to sugar. How about we equate fruit to magnesium? How about we equate fruit to any of these things? It could be done. Just because there's a lot of sugar. How about we equate it to water? There's more water in most fruit than there is sugar. Not very smart. Not a good way to approach foods as a whole, to just say sugar, right? That's like saying honey is just sugar. It's not. So fruit is digested. Thank you for the $5, $4.99.
Thank you for the $5 lecture.
There was a war against honey in the late 80s for that reason. They always have these weird ways of manipulating things, and that they kind of make them look like they're bad for you. And then that's as soon as they introduce that synthetic replacement that doesn't have X and Y, and it's completely undigestible.
So, Barney, my dude, I don't know if you're a boy or girl. Barney, go look at human breast milk content. Humans' number one energy source, carbohydrates, sugars in the form of carbs broken down from the breast milk. It's right there. Okay. Predators have a fat-based breast milk. Humans have a sugar carb-based breast milk. That tells us what our diet is for the rest.
Brain energy.
Thank you. Now,
all meat eaters' brains develop like right on an equal plane with the body. In fact, their musculatory and all that develops quite a bit faster. They have to play catch up. Whereas a human, their brain, the majority of their first year of growth is in the brain. And the largest percentile of weight and change is in the head.
At the top of the branches where the fruit is located inside the body, so to speak. Right.
Yeah.
So, number one, you don't have to be afraid of sugar. You should be afraid of Dixie sugar. You should be afraid of powdered sugar. You should be afraid of cane sugar that is no longer cane sugar. Okay. You don't have to be.
We talked about the Hunza people, right? Me and you, the oldest living people on Earth right now. Nobody really talks about them. They live in the mountains of Pakistan. They eat dates and apricots. And both of those are like by poundage the most sugar rich.
Very sugary.
Very sugary. Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to be afraid of sugar. Okay, you have to be afraid of how sugar is getting to you, whether it's being dehydrated, powdered, bleached, caking agents, things like this. Stay away from the white powdered sugar. Cane sugar, pure cane sugar. You know what I had a couple days ago? They take a cane stalk, they run it through a press, and you get about a half gallon of just sugar water straight out of the cane. No ingredients. No. They just squeeze the stalk, and it's just delicious. Sugar water. It's amazing. It's like coconut water. It's like, it's so good for you. So amazing. I don't feel like I drink. If you took that and measured the sugar, it would probably come back comparable to Mountain Dew or Pepsi or something. Does that mean it's affecting the body the same way? Not at all. Did I feel like my head was going to pop off? Did I feel like I had to run around the parking lot? No, I felt cool, relaxed. It cooled me down. I felt hydrated the rest of the day. You don't have to be afraid of sugar, okay? Fruit does not have sugar in it. it is designed to have sucroses, fructoses inside of it. You don't have to be afraid of sugar. This is not the path to health, is worrying about the numbers or the names that were given, the certain chemicals firing off in the digestive process. Sugar and fruit, don't worry about it. It doesn't even matter. Fruit diet, animal diet, doesn't matter. Don't be afraid of sugar. Okay. So thanks, guys, for dealing with that.
Well, and you
Yeah,
know,
you're
to
good.
take it on another weird tangent, there's quite a few books written about that. You can eat anything, and it's your mental state, right? These tribes that swallow venom or eat arsenic, sorry, and it does nothing. You know, the belief, and that's the trick. If they have you obsessing about your food and poisons and what's in the water and all these things, although there is something to that, of course, but it's just like the what's that test they do with medicine nowadays, where they tested the placebo. It's the same idea that if you're like super obsessing and concerned and worried and you're being poisoned, that you could be eating a perfect diet, but if your mental state is that way, you're still going to be kind of consuming yourself with that. The belief is very powerful. You have to be careful what you think. Don't let people interfere with it. Anyways, we're getting off subject, but yeah.
Well, actually, to bring it back to the subject, the ideogram or the character that represents eat in China is also the same character that represents eclipse. And so it's actually the same meaning, eat and eclipse, the same little glyph there.
Interesting.
Because it was thought that the feminine is essentially eating the masculine. And that's something that I kind of came across a lot, is just the masculine being overtaken by the feminine. Something along these lines. Obviously makes sense that would be the case. But this sort of consumption or eating idea is baked into eclipse symbolism for sure.
Feels like we're reaching an omega moment here. We started off with the T, right, in the eclipse, and now we're coming into this place with eat in the eclipse.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is just a weird observation. But there's this chain of stores that are opening up in Texas, and they're devoted to tea. Right, like they're popping up all over the place. It's called Nobility, and it's just started to happen in the last year and a half, 2 years. And it's not the only one. There's other like these. I don't know. They're kind of like the Starbucks version of tea shops that are opening in Texas. Do you guys have that in Florida or Washington? Ben, or you're in Arizona? Are you in Arizona? Oregon. Do you guys have just like these strictly like tea chains?
We did, but yeah, there was a big phase probably 15 years ago. It was called Tivana, right. But they all went out of business.
Right. Yeah, that's my understanding too. Basically, Ben, are you in the Portland area by chance?
Yep.
Gotcha. I was there for a number of years. I'm out in the Gorge now, so we're not too far from each other.
Awesome, beautiful place.
Yeah, man, definitely.
When they were mentioning Robert was mentioning some of the rivers that show signs of stonework that look like they were shaped by man. The gorges, I see that all the time. Yeah. I grew up fishing on the gorge with my father all the time, and
gotcha.
I always just thought as a kid, like, God is a crazy guy. Look at this stuff. The Columbia River Gorge is a crazy place. There's parts of it that look a lot like the Grand Canyon, and when you're in there, it's this realm that we inhabit is a very interesting place. Beautiful area. So good to know that you're close, Mario.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I'm in the suburbs. I stay as far away from downtown as I can.
I gotcha. Yeah, good call.
Especially with little kids. Portland has turned into an absolute war zone. It's fucking.
It's a psych ward, right? That's what it is. Oh, it's a psych ward.
It's crazy now. It's next level.
Yeah. Yep. It's horrible. It's sad, and that's what it's happening to a lot of cities, especially on the West Coast here.
Portland's an Aquarian city, right?
I don't know. You tell me.
I believe
You
it
know,
is.
that would make sense. Yeah, I could see that.
Oh,
For
it's an
sure.
Aquarian city.
Robert, I was going to ask you actually. You mentioned Texas being a Capricorn state, correct? Earlier
Yep.
on,
Mhm.
and I find that fascinating, considering that it's south, right?
Yeah.
And then whenever I think of the zodiac wheel in my head, I tend to position Capricorn down below and then Cancer up top. Obviously, like any orientation is fine, I guess, but that's how I look at it. Kind of going back to the idea of the gateway of man, kind of symbolically being Cancer, the gateway of the gods being Capricorn. What's the Cancer state? Is there a Cancer state here by chance?
Yeah, there is a Cancer state. Texas has the moon in Capricorn as well.
Oh,
So, yeah, hold on one second.
gotcha.
There's a guy by the name of Mark Dodich who has a nice little PDF online. If you ever want to look up states and their astrology, he's got some cities broken down. So let me just
Nice.
get it here real fast. Yeah, Austin is also a Capricorn city, but it has a Libra moon instead. And so you tend to get more kind of an artistic and, you know,
You have the dichotomy.
yeah, that
You have the
vibe.
working class. I've been to Austin a few times. My sister lived in Breckenridge, Texas, small town,
Right.
and I always thought Austin was so interesting, you know,
It
because
was up to a point, and then it became less
you could look across the street and see, you know, men in Levi's that were 20 years old and cowboy boots, and you know, you could tell those the epitome of the working class. And then you could look over and see, you know, like an art studio where these two peoples couldn't be more distinctly opposite of one another.
right, right. Absolutely. That's Austin in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I think Mario is fishing around for Cancer states that are in northern latitudes, right? That's what I'm thinking. And there are two that are pretty far north. One is Idaho,
Mm,
New Hampshire. Those are two Cancer states.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Interesting. No, you picked up exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah. There's quite a few Capricorn states, more than you think. Georgia's a Capricorn state. New Mexico is a Capricorn state. There's quite a few Capricorn states. Iowa is Capricorn, so not uncommon. It's not an uncommon sun sign for a state.
Gotcha.
Well, to kind of bring this back, my time's getting close to when I got to get off here, but I wanted to just kind of pick your brain a little bit, Robert and Longo. What do you see it coming with this eclipse, physically, metaphysically, and what's going to be the kind of fallout, so to say? Is there going to be a particular event? You know, because like when I talked about, you know, I did a radio show a long time ago, and one of the last episodes we did was during the conjunction of 2020 with Saturn and Jupiter. And I talked about how, you know, you look through history and they always talked about it was that conjunction was called the maker of princes, and that often when Pluto played some role in between the conjunction there, that could kind of be a sign of pestilence or
Saturn-Pluto conjunction changed everything.
Yeah, right. COVID started just shortly
absolutely.
after that.
Changed everything.
The presidents switched hands, and, you know, during Saturn Jupiter conjunctions, when leaders switch positions, there's often an assassination attempt
Right.
or
right.
a character assassination,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That
that's true.
has the person removed or they lose favor with the people, which we saw quite evidently. Do you see anything like that coming with this event? You know, we have the Trump stuff picking up. We talked about it being in Texas, the wall symbology.
Well,
Because
yeah.
migration, you know, that from a metaphysical standpoint.
Yeah. Well, I think with the sun being eclipsed in Libra, I think it's going to bring this idea of partnership and relationship and bonding more in focus. That's my sense. And really as a precursor for what's coming, because I believe the April eclipse is heavy, really, really heavy. And I could see that eclipse as being, you know, a sign of war, you know, internal war in this country. I mean, we've got probably about 300,000 fighting age men that have just crossed this border and are just, you know, here, right? What are they doing here? Where are they holed up? And you're dealing with, I would say, whether it's engineered and organized, or you're just dealing with a group that has a social animus, right? Like maybe they're just really pissed off that, you know, we were real fucks over in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Libya, and ruined their way of life, right? That doesn't leave those people. That stays with them. So they can either piggyback, you know, on the momentum of their bitterness, or they can just be outright bitter. But I think we have an issue, and I think that issue has a lot to do with what's happening in April. What's also interesting now, if you look at this in context of what happened in the White House today, where Kevin McCarthy got deposed. This is the first time any Speaker of the House has been deposed, and it's happening under Libra and Mars in Libra, and it's right on that south node. Like Mars is on that south node point, and the nodes play a critical role in the eclipses. So what happened with Kevin McCarthy, I think, was also a precursor for what's coming with the eclipse. I mean, this is a major shift and tilting of power, right? Like McCarthy's kind of this, you know, maybe slightly left of the middle rhino who's doing deals on the side, and he got bounced, right? This is very interesting. And we're also in the Pluto return.
Right.
The last degrees of the Pluto return of the United States. It is.
Isn't it interesting too? Like, again, why I wanted to get your opinion from a kind of geopolitical standpoint is that I talked a lot at the time. I co-hosted the show with a friend of mine from Denmark, and you know, we talked a lot about, you know, Trump's houses and what he kind of symbolized, and how there were some very Saturnian undertones with Trump, and how the conjunction affected, you know, what we were hypothesizing. Obviously, it had quite a lot more drastic relations with everything that came after that COVID, the presidential election and everything. But there's no coincidence in the timing, right? We're nearly 4 years removed.
Right.
Pluto is here again, and under even more powerful circumstances. And Trump is back in the spotlight. Libra, scales, justice, lies, false claims, all these things, kind of breaking somebody's they're destroying their credibility, right? So what do you think Pluto's effect is going to be on all of this? Not just geopolitically, of course, but whatever you want to add to the idea.
Well, it's the end of an age, right? I mean, whether it's the Pluto return, and it's the end of an age, because when Pluto goes into Aquarius, we're off in a very different part of the cosmos. So we're watching the death of things that we've known, become familiar with. Maybe we love them. Maybe there are things we don't love about them, right? But it's all in, you know, in the dying time right now, right? That's really where Pluto is at, and all the things that are sort of this apotheosis of the industry and capitalism and governance and all those things that theoretically were built, you know, over the last, say, 200 years, right? They're all dying. And this new thing that is coming is very, very different, right? And it can go in a lot of different ways. And I feel like, you know, we looked at 2000 as this kind of like weird sort of millennial fever. This feels more millennial fever than 2000, right? This feels like we're really coming to, you know, the end of something. And I also get a real hit of this American revolutionary energy, which is kicking back up again. I can see it. I can feel it from people. You know, I go through the Twitter feed, and it's not just like, you know, these numbskull kind of, you know, weekend patriots. There are people that are really voicing very deep, passionate, opinions about the state of where we are right now. And it's starting to feel a lot like 1776 again. And they didn't feel that for a long time. Like even with all the Jan 6 stuff and even with all like the MAGA, Make America Great Again, I mean, that felt like a lot of marketing in a lot of ways, but there's something different happening now. People are getting the taste of desperation in their mouth. That's really what's going on. So this eclipse in April, it's a humdinger, man. It comes up from the south, right? It comes up from Mexico. And it brings a different energy with it. You know, it comes right through Texas and it dogtails the New Madrid fault line, which I think is also significant. And then it leaves, to your point earlier, leaves, I think, in New Hampshire, in a Cancer state, which is kind of interesting. So that's my take. But the other thing, too, is like, you know, when we go into this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is, I think, a byproduct of this eclipse, which is happening in Aries, they're all, those are going to be in Aries, too. Like, that's part of the story.
Definitely.
You know? And when I see that, I also have this sense of like a birth, right? There's a birth happening because Aries is birth, right? It's birth pangs, it's bloody. Longo and I were talking about this before we started the show tonight, that 9-month cycle is a Saturn cycle because you're dealing with the impregnation, right? The conception is at that square point where the baby will be delivered. So, you know, even the coming into the world is a Saturnian event.
Yeah, Alpha Omega, right?
Right,
The
based
10th
on
month.
that 90-degree angle for that 9-month cycle. And I feel like
it's 9 months and the baby's born in the 10th.
That's right.
You enter the realm in the 10th month.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So this is an interesting time that we're in. And I feel like there's some very powerful birth energy, but it's not easy, man. This is, you know, we're dealing with Aries, we're dealing with blood, you know, we're dealing with the dissolution of systems and weird.
Yeah, I mean, don't you, like, you know, I always look at politics very much kind of from the Jungian and the Julian Jaynes idea. You have the red and the blue.
Right.
Biden couldn't be more of a kind of subconscious creation.
Right.
He's just like a babbling. You don't understand it. To the conscious person, he makes no sense. They're so juxtaposed, right? Trump and him, and you know, the blue tie, the red tie. There's just so much of this dualistic warring kind of in this campaign, so to say. Funny the terminology, because all politics correlates so much to astronomy, but yeah, I just wanted to hear what you thought about, because I know Pluto plays a really big part, and I think that there's no coincidence that Trump's back in the picture again. And the last time he really had big, you know, the falsity of the election and all this stuff, right, was when COVID kicked off and we had the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which is at the end of the year, right before Christmas.
That's right. Yeah.
And then Pluto
in Aquarius, the 20-year cycle.
Right, and then Pluto came into the picture only a few months later, right as COVID was announced. I believe it was March, right? The true beginning of the year.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You know, when Trump should not have run for president, by the way. Like astrologically, he was going through a Saturn opposition, and it happens every first one happens at 14, the next one happens at 44, the next one happens at 74, and during those oppositions, you're supposed to flip your life script. When you're 14, you're moving away from your roots. You're establishing your identity, you're being rebellious. So that 30-year cycle with Saturn, I don't think he was supposed to run. He should have, you know, if he was going to be president, he would have had to have been a completely different president. Like, you know, how does he modulate? There's no modulation there, right? So it's like when Tom Brady turned 44, he should have quit football. And look what happened to him. He plays an extra year, gets dragged through the mud, has a very public divorce with Giselle. He loses a shit ton of money with Sam Bankman-Fried's little operation. Like, he had the year from hell. Had he lived up to his agreement and gone through the Saturn opposition, done something different, would have been fine. You know, the most 10D chess thing Trump could have done was not run in 2020. Because that's what the astrology was saying. And then look what happened. Right? So you if you don't make these changes with these 30-year cycles, you court disaster. You get what you do is you get the malefic side of Saturn. Like that's what happens.
Yeah, you get the scythe.
Yep.
Yep, you get reaped. Yeah, it's interesting. It's that's like the only, and the MAGA thing too I've talked about before with Longo. That the priests of Zoroaster were called the MAGA, the keepers of the flame, the brotherhood, the kind of the old masonry.
Right.
They were called the MAGA, the Magi, and their abbreviation was MAGA. And Trump is there's so much symbolically about the guy. And I just didn't think that was a coincidence at all. Make America great again. It's very Atlantean, and it just makes me think of Bacon and New Atlantis and kind of what this whole Trump is very Atlantean, whether people want to see those correlations.
He's very Atlantean. He talks about these new cities that he wants to build, right? These freedom cities.
Yeah.
That are right. I mean, how much more Atlantean can you get than that?
He's very utopian. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so was his father and grandfather.
Yeah, interesting.
But anyways, I got to get the kids ready for bed, so.
Yeah, I should go too.
Longo, I appreciate you having me on and letting me talk with all you guys. Mario, it was a pleasure meeting you. Robert, as always, wonderful talking to you again.
Ben, great, man. Great hanging out with you and love hearing you bring the gravy. And Mario, really cool meeting you. And
yeah, pleasure.
You too. Yeah, thanks, guys. This was fun.
Thanks for putting it together, Longo.
Anytime, man. Anytime. We'll do it again soon. I know you guys will all get along great.
I guess it's a good thing. It's a good problem to have where the host is just quietly letting the conversation happen. So I appreciate you letting me ramble like I always do. But yeah. So I'm going to get out of here. You guys keep the conversation flowing.
Well, no, here we're gonna touch it down here for all of us.
I'll stay till it's all done. Then.
All right, give us a wrap, Longo.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Go check out Robert Phoenix at robertphoenix.com if you want to check out the event. Get signed up. There's still time to go check it out. Check out the Eclipse. Come hang out in Texas. I'll be there. He'll be there. Yeah, good time. Go check it out. Like we said, robertphoenix.com. Go find him on the 11th House, Robert Phoenix, YouTube. What else? You have another channel, right?
Yeah, we're doing this serious sports thing with Al. Your buddy
serious
Al.
sports, yes.
Yeah. That's on Monday
serious sports with Al Dog, Alan Erickson. So you can find him there. So Robert Phoenix. Okay. Now, Mario, guys, go check him out. Symbolic Studies on Instagram and YouTube. Top-notch gravy when it comes to symbolism, visual, and the etymology. He does plenty of etymology too, plenty of astrology. And I think most of you guys know all these guests by now, but still, go check him out. Definitely worth the follow, subscribe. I always learn a ton. And then, of course, my buddy, my bro, Ben, the archivist from Analog. Go check him out on his channel, The Archivist. He's on Twitter. He's on Instagram. And yeah, with an emphasis on newspaper articles, archiving old excerpts from, pre-censorship, what made it through the cracks. He's the guy to go to if you want.
Weird and mystical. My last two were Beyond the Ice Wall from the 1800s, an expedition beyond the ice wall. And then I did one about the Atlantean subterranean world below the Rocky Mountains. Those are my last two videos, and I think they're pretty awesome. So, but yeah, as always, so much overlap and could talk for hours. So as always, yeah, thanks for having me, and
of course
I could get in here.
Yeah, guys, go check him out. Robert Phoenix, Mario from Symbolic Studies, Ben, the archivist from Waking Up with Analog. Okay, guys, thanks for joining us. We're going to do it again soon. Go check out some of the other videos I've done with these guys. And yeah, from Texas with love, right? we can X Texas off the list now that we've covered it. But everyone have a good night. Okay. Peace.
All right, guys. Take care.
Night, everybody.